Welcome in, everybody. We got another dev interview for you guys, and we got the design lead for the latest season. So let me go ahead and hand it over to him to let him introduce himself.
Hey, my name's Michael Majors. I've been a game designer for close to a decade now, and I've been working on Marvel Snap for about a year and a half, going up on a year and a half. And yeah, I'm a season lead. I work on content design. It's a pretty small group of us that are kind of involved in the specific content design. So we are involved in a lot of the different processes with limited time game modes and things along those lines. And then also one of my primary responsibilities is balance lead, and probably 95% of the OTAs are written by me.
Oh wow, I actually didn't know that the OTAs. That's cool. How long have you been doing the OTAs?
Since almost since I started, like pretty much after I got onboarded,
Oh
so
wow,
a
so
little
like
over
a year and a half.
a year. Yeah.
So we know Jason was the design lead on the last season, and you're the design lead of this season. How much of the design is a team effort, and what exactly does the lead do?
Yeah, I mean, we're a pretty small team on content overall, so I would say the majority of our work is collaborative based. But the primary way of cutting up the season leads is basically who has the final say, who has the primary responsibility, who's the liaison between other teams when you have to talk about, what does this card need for art or VFX, or talking to other folks, things along those lines. So I would say overall we're kind of all working together, and we're all kind of got our hands in every season. But at the end of the day, it's basically just the title of who has the final call and who needs to fix any problems.
New season that coming up. You want to give us a little like intro to what the season is?
Yeah, so this is another Daredevil season, and the headliner of the season is Shadowlands Daredevil. Um, and something we wanted to do, of course. I think the audience is pretty used to us refreshing characters at this point, but we certainly don't want to just make generic Daredevil A, generic Daredevil B, generic Daredevil C. So something that I think is really exciting about this version of Daredevil is kind of depicting him being corrupted by the demon, the beast, and this is sort of him taking up the moniker as the leader of the Hand, which he temporarily does. So this is sort of evil Daredevil, if you want to think of it that way. So there's some cool implications there. I really like this design, and it also, going back to a Daredevil season, has given us a chance to refresh some other characters in some cool ways that we're excited about, as well as just introduce some additional Daredevil centric characters that we haven't seen in Marvel's map yet.
Let's start with the season pass card, Shadowlands Daredevil. So this card, it introduces both shuffling and rewarding specific draw conditions. What was the design space you were trying to explore with this card?
Honestly, from a mechanical perspective, I didn't really have a particular goal. I was just really enamored with the concept of, like, he is possessed by a demonic force, and what is the kind of stuff that you can play in with that really shows off that top-down perspective. When I say top-down perspective, I means designing from the perspective of what the character is from a flavor-wise, versus sort of bottom-up perspective is the opposite, where it's like, okay, I have this very particular mechanical execution that I want to make on a card. Now let me skin it properly so it doesn't feel too dissonant to people playing with the card. This is shuffling in demons. That is a token that currently exists from the hood, which is just a quite strong token. So that's something that we already had access to. That makes a lot of sense. So it seemed like a way that we can make a pretty exciting and compelling card. And yeah, shuffling in three demons, 3/6s in your deck. It's got some stuff going on to play off the demonic energy, and I think it's a fun card.
So what do you think about the risk versus reward of shuffling cards into the player's deck? Because you're adding the potential power, but also randomness and some inconsistency there.
Right, for sure. Yeah, I mean, this is something we've even debated internally, just like how strong is it to draw a demon on an average turn. I think my personal take is that the first demon you draw is actively quite strong. The second one has a fair amount of diminishing returns, and the third one maybe substantial diminishing returns. But you got to remember that every time that you draw a demon, you're also buffing Daredevil for free. So in some sense, you're basically drawing a 1/8, which is quite a powerful rate. But the ability to just like I need to fill in any gaps in my energy curve, or I get to play multiple cards in a turn. All that are all of those, excuse me, are pretty powerful synergies or chances to make your energy curve operate really well. Um, but yeah, I do expect that because of the quote unquote inconsistency or diminishing specific cards in your deck, this will probably have more of a home in more mid range strategies than like straightforward combo decks, for example.
Do you ever design a season with a more cohesive deck in mind, or is it more letting each card be a puzzle piece that players can find the right spot for?
When you say that, do you mean like archetype specific, or like we think that this is going to go in, you know, 11 of 12 cards or whatever, and we have a pretty rock solid vision of like what the final deck will look like?
I guess it more, yeah. Is it going into like a specific archetype? Or are you planning this to be like a deck? You're like, we design a card. There's a deck that we want it to be in.
That is one of the things with having 12 card decks is that we can't be too far off. Hopefully we have a pretty good sense of the kinds of decks that these are going to go into. We certainly might miss interactions. We certainly might miss, very specific pairings or synergies within cards that have cascading implications on what the decks might look like. We are not perfect. We cannot replicate, thousands and thousands and thousands of games because we just don't have that level of ability to play test. But yeah, I would say for the most part that when it comes to targeting specific synergies, we have a very good idea of what those decks will look like, especially when it comes to stuff like destroy or discard or this very synergistic archetypes. um Otherwise, we take our best guess. We have a pretty good sense of what's going on. We certainly hope that there is something compelling enough about the design to where we can be surprised and it just won't go into one specific home. I think it is really important for people to be able to express their creativity.
Like I know I personally love to be creative with my deck building, and I'm always looking for a fun new deck to play. Always hoping for a card to spawn more of a new deck rather than just slotting it into that like 11 out of 12 deck that already exists. So when you're building a new season, what's the priority? Is it creating that cohesive internal synergy package between the new cards, or is it kind of seeding multiple existing archetypes with tools?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think there's necessarily a one size fits all answer. A lot of it is more so trying to execute on like what is the coolest version of these characters, what makes their power suite, feel like it's coming to life, what's creating a cohesive season when you look at the set of characters. But simultaneously, we might just be like, destroy is really weak, or destroy really needs a 4 drop, or something along those lines, where it's like we need a very specific targeted response. And if we have a character that lines up with that need for a specific archetype or for a metagame pressure, then we're happy to fill it in.
Yeah, because looking at this set, we've got some destruction synergy with Muse, we got negative power interactions with Akari and Lady Bullseye, some ramp-based plays, some more tempo-based cards. Was this intentionally spread across those archetypes?
I did make a conscious effort to kind of make this more of a broad season where it's just like a lot of these cards are just kind of playable on their own or in a combination of small synergy packages. And that was somewhat a response again to the back-to-back objective season of just kind of making these a little bit less complicated, a little bit more straightforward. Um, but yeah, of course, Muse is a serial killer, so it makes sense to make him a destroy card. And so, that was the primary motivation with going with that, of course. You know, Lady Bullseye is harkening back to Bullseye that currently exists in the game and has a synergistic ability with, or not synergistic, but a complementary, flavor with him. And then, Akari also being an assassin is just an easy tie-in to make it work well with Lady Bullseye. So that kind of gives you a sense of the thinking of how to assign specific mechanical identities to specific characters.
Yeah, so how often is the card designed based on the theme of the card versus the other way around, where you have at a card that you want to work a certain way and then you assign a character to it that you think fits that way? Is it more so you have the card and then you design the mechanic, or mechanic first, then assign it a card?
Vast majority, we assign the mechanic to the character identity.
So when a season first gets decided upon, do you guys then choose which characters are going to go in the season and then you design from there?
Yeah, a lot of our process is, what do we think would create a cool, cohesive season identity, a repository of characters that we can use. Um, they're kind of harmonious, where it's like, okay, maybe we have A, B, C, and D that are really cool characters that have this moniker that can go about them. Okay, that sounds like that could be this specific season theme, and then maybe we fill in the gaps. There's not like a super specific codified the way that we do it, but generally speaking, it's like, okay, we have 2 to 3 or 4 headliner characters that we think are really cool, and then we can build a season around them.
Because we're now hundreds of cards deep into the Marvel Universe, and how challenging has it been to find new characters that feel mechanically distinct?
That can definitely be a challenging. There's definitely lots of characters with super strength, super speed, things along those lines. Um, but I think that is one of the rewarding challenges of the job, is just figuring out how we can make those things feel a little bit different every time. And of course, there are some cards that are more exciting than others when it comes to super novel mechanical space, but that's just how it goes.
Yeah, we're seeing more alternate versions or deeper cuts. Do you see that becoming more of the norm going forward?
Yes, I think that odds are good. We've seen multiple releases of mantles at this point. You know, that's just the nature of a game lasting for a longer time. And, specifically with the Marvel IP, obviously there's exciting characters that people know really well. And all things being equal, we would probably rather use more characters that people know than the super obscure deep cuts. But we also want to make sure that we do include some deep cuts, and a portion of our audience does get really excited about them. We are cognizant of the fact that we want to make sure that we're not using just all old characters all the time.
So, do you feel like a card should be able to stand on its own when you release it with a new season, or do you kind of sometimes feel like it needs some support that's like coming out in the coming weeks? And how do you work with cards that are expecting some support to come out in the coming weeks? How does that impact your design for the card?
Yeah, that's a tricky question. We have certainly a few times, and even actively right now, we have cards in flight that have synergy with cards coming down the pipeline. Kind of, I would even say intentionally. But we certainly don't want cards that purely exist in a vacuum, or are purely there to help out cards in the future. If 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 a player sees a card being released and is not like, I can understand the types of cards I would play with this or what its home could be, I would definitely consider that a failure.
Do you see yourself designing these limiters that you put into play, cards like Luke Cage or things like that, that just kind of target a singular archetype? Do you find those as like cards you want to design for like levers so that you could just have that balance in the game where you can design some strong cards and then things to keep them in check?
Yes and no. I mean, it's something that I try to harp on a lot in OTAs is that we want tech cards to exist in the game. We want them to be strong enough to matter, and for players to feel like they have the agency to interact with their opponents. The thing that we want to avoid is to where the rate or general strength of the tech cards is so high that players can feel rewarded by just playing as many of them in their deck as they realistically can, plus whatever they need to fill in the point differential, basically, to make sure they can actually win games. Those have been meta games that people just haven't responded very well to, and we do overall think that the Marvel Snap's just a lot more fun when people are doing like their powerful synergy things, as long as there is enough of a stopgap that exists within the card pool in the metagame that people have the agency to play against them if they feel like they want to improve their matchup against a specific deck.
Jason, in the last dev interview, mentioned that overly strong cards risk becoming auto includes, and you just mentioned that you don't want like not necessarily strong cards, but like you don't want tech cards to be just thrown in and having a bunch of them all in one deck. That could also reduce variety. So Snap doesn't really use hard restrictions like a class system. Do you see uh, in the future some sort of restrictions being put in place? Objectives kind of introduce those soft constraints by having you to have to work your way up to something so you can only include in certain decks. Do you see any sort of stronger restrictions to allow some more powerful designs to be put into the game?
I mean, I'm not going to say never, but I would be very surprised if we ever considered making cards that are like, you cannot play this card in combination with another card or something along those lines. Um, Mostly just because of the way Snap is structured, it's like it is so reliant on synergy as is. So like Carnage already kind of has that soft restriction in some ways, right? Like you don't want to traditionally destroy your cards unless you have cards that specifically synergize with destroying them. Simultaneously, discarding your cards in card games is not usually a very strong thing to do. But when you have cards that trigger off being discarded, then obviously it changes that dynamic. So, those are kind of the two poster children for like, we already kind of do this. It's just not very blatant. But, never say never.
Yeah, because we see like in Team Clash, we see there's some like team synergy, and I could
Right.
foresee a future with like a team exclusive tag, which it says like this card can only be played if you have like 6 Avengers in your deck or something like that. Something along those lines, where it's a restriction that kind of forces you to play it, but you have like soft restrictions where maybe it only really gains value if you have 6 Avengers in your deck, because you could always make it like objective, like play 6 Avengers and then it gets its power or something like that. So it could be like
Yeah.
again a soft restriction, but you don't see it being some sort of new like team tag being added to the regular game mode or something like that.
Well, I would say that I agree with your point or your premise that Team Clash is a good execution of this. That is the kind of thing that we might be interested in doing. But I think we're much more likely to be like, this is clearly the most powerful, to the point that the incentive is strong enough that you're going to include these very specific types of cards in your deck, versus saying you're only allowed to play this with this very specific subset of cards.
Is there a conscious effort you guys see across seasons to vary the power levels so that you could have like maybe a safe card versus a high risk, maybe more powerful card, high impact one that comes out? Do you guys like knowingly have some that are going to be stronger than others?
Um, Not consciously, but there are certainly spaces that we might play in that are inherently more risky than others. So, despite maybe wanting to balance two cards approximately the same, the fact that one exists on a mechanical level where it's like we can't truly predict this card and where it will land, as well as another card, there might be the excuse me, the perspective of a larger gap in how we're balancing those cards, even though that's not the actual design intention. It's tricky because, like, most of the time the cards are relatively balanced against one another, and so people don't really notice that. But when you do see our mistakes, or our whatever, something just lands stronger than we expect it to, it feels like there's a very large gap between that card and a previous card that maybe is very similar, or something that went to another season or something along those lines. So I would say a lot of that kind of comes down to just how things play out, how we measure risk. And no, overall, it's not a conscious effort for us to say that like one season is more exciting than the next one. Ideally, it's like anybody can jump in the game whenever they want and engage with the season and have a really good time with it.
Cool. So out of this entire season, which card are you personally most excited to see players get a hand on and why?
Yeah, I mean, I really like Daredevil. Just, I think it is mechanically interesting and unique, and I think there will be debates about whether drawing demons is strong or not. That I think is pretty cool. Um, it also just encourages you to just sort of put some large characters in your deck and maybe play a little bit more fair, than we have seen in recent times. So I'm pretty excited about that. Karen Page is another card I think is really cool. Sort of pseudo playing in the Wiccan space of trying to get you to curve out, but playing in a different way where obviously Wiccan wants you to play high energy characters or just be very efficient with playing lots of characters. Karen's like, okay, well, how do you multiply the buffs that I'm giving you and find ways to make me even more efficient than I am? So those are the two that jump out immediately. I do really love Misa's story. I'm quite happy with that character and how it panned out. Just like this is a serial killer that sort of leaves his trophies in various locations and gets stronger because of that. So I'm quite proud of that design. Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of cool stuff, but those are the three that jump out to me immediately.
Is there a card that you're kind of nervous about from like a balance standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, I think Punisher War Machine is the card that I feel, if like we were just talking about previously, where it's like, okay, these are two cards, and one of them has a higher risk profile than the other, and we'll see how it pans out. Um, Punisher definitely has a high risk profile, just in terms of like we have never done this, where you have the potential to generate a max energy on turn two. Um, it's also a pretty high variance card in terms of like it having that Iron Patriot style gameplay. So we were conscious of those things. We tried to balance it around those. We'll see how it plays out.
Do you actively design with kind of future proofing in mind, or do you accept that some cards will eventually break as the pool grows?
Yeah, I think a lot of that again kind of comes back to the risk profile discussion, where it's really easy to be super conservative about cards, and it's really easy to make cards that are way too strong. Making cards in the middle is obviously the where you generally want to land and is the trickiest. So again, a lot of that is just like where do we think taking bets on that risk is going to be the most fruitful. So there might be a specific card that eventually we decide it's like, oh, this is way too blocking. It's actually limiting our design space because we've identified 3 or 4 designs that we want to make, but we think it'll be problematic because of an existing card. We might be willing to nerf the existing card or let things play out, see if our hypothesis is correct, then nerf the existing card. Um, but again, like we just want to make sure that we're making cards that are very exciting and to keep the play experience fresh and create new mechanics and interactions. So that's the most important thing is just making sure that the game can keep going and being fun.
What defines a healthy meta to you guys internally?
Yeah, I mean that's a tricky question. The number one thing we care about is that there's diversity, and if players can feel like if there's a couple decks they like, they don't feel silly or dumb for playing one of the decks they like. It can be competitive, or that they again kind of going back to the agency discussion, they have the agency to include 1 or 2 different cards in a deck that they like and have a chance in the current metagame. Um, so traditionally, what happens when something becomes problematic to the point that we feel like we need to nerf it is less so that its win rate is so dramatically high. That's actually like the easy time when it's we can figure out when to nerf something. It's when diversity goes really low, and especially when things that end up in a situation where it's like, okay, well, everybody needs to play Cosmo because there's these other problematic cards that are basically making it so that every single deck has to include this in their starting 12. Those are the kinds of signs where it's like, okay, this is actually not a very healthy metagame, even if the numbers actually look reasonable.
Do you guys have some set of internal numbers that you look at that when something crosses that threshold, you're like, okay, this is too much, and then it's next up on the docket for the OTA?
Nothing, no hard data lines. We have heuristics where it's like, okay, this reached a certain number, we should investigate that. And then we start poking and then trying to figure out what's going on, and do maybe some more deep dives on data. But I would say that data informs us that there might be a problem, not that there is a problem.
So if a card fails slash succeeds, what does that failure or success actually look like to you? Like, is it a low play rate, low win rate, or just like lack of excitement?
Yeah, I mean, number one thing is that just people don't care about it. You know, for better or worse, there being some sense of polarity in the perception of a card is good. You know, either obviously we would rather people be really excited about it, but if it's just like everybody is super middling or mid about a card, that's way worse than some people being loving a card and some people hating a card, right? Having that strong emotional reaction to it implies that there's at least something interesting going on. Whereas if nobody's excited about it, then it's probably just boring, and that's not something we want to do. Is create boring game pieces.
Something I've noticed is that a lot of cards that come out that people are the most excited about end up being just really strong cards and really kind of,
Yep.
I would say, unbalanced, and they love them for the first week and then they start to hate them, as time goes on, just because they become too dominant. Is that something you look out for? Because like it does seem like it's kind of that hard position where people end up really loving them when they first come out and they were really popular, and then all of a sudden it's just too much.
Yeah. I mean, I think we would prefer that outcome where something at least gets people excited about it and talking about it and playing with it, even if it ends up being a little too strong. That's a better outcome for us than just like, yeah, this card releases and nobody cares about it. In a perfect world, like I'll give you an example of something that I think went really well. Going back to Man Spider, it was like the first week it came out, people are like, "Oh, I'm posting these Reddit screenshots. These are super dumb numbers that it's producing. You know, I can't believe this card is this strong. It needs action taken against it, so on and so forth." But it turns out that the data said that it was actually a pretty weak card, despite the fact that it had these huge, pop off dramatic moments. And just kind of naturally, people figure that out and they stop playing with it over time. And that's a fine outcome. Just like this is something that brought people a lot of joy and sparked discussion, but didn't end up being strong enough to keep up in the winners metagame for a long time. But the people who still love that deck still play it.
Yeah, one of the things I think is interesting about Marvel Snap compared to some other games is that it is a game of tech cards, as we've kind of talked about a little bit. Um, do you see cards that might actually be strong in a vacuum might actually be weak due to some of the tech cards that put limiters on it? So, for example, Man Spider, as you just pointed out, is a strong card at getting big numbers, but there are so many tech cards right now that are able to just deal with that, such as Shang-Chi or Shadow King, that both deal with that. It's similar to a card like Black Panther, which I think Man Spider kind of just like does the same thing, but kind of a little bit better at times. Do you see that being part of the reason why that card is kept in check? And do you see that as being um, one of the reasons why when you define strength, it might not necessarily be in a vacuum. It has to be strength when compared to the tech cards that are available to keep it in check.
Yeah, I think all those observations are correct. You know, some of it is balancing against the commonly played tech, right? Like, is this card strong enough to see play despite the fact that cards like Shadow King or Shang-Chi exist? Um, okay, maybe it needs to be a little stronger than we would expect because of the existence of those cards. Now, then it's a question of like, okay, is it way too strong in the games where players don't draw those cards? Or and despite the fact that those cards are in those players' decks or even see play in the game, is this card's, able to survive or be strong in those situations? And that's like, the super problematic case, right? Where it's like this card is so powerful that it can just shrug off targeted tech.
Yeah, because something like Man Spider, for example, I feel like is an example of if you don't have tech cards, you kind of lose to that deck. Whereas if you do have tech cards, you just straight up steal 8 cubes. So it's one of those ones that
Mm.
it kind of becomes polarizing depending on if you have the cards to keep it in check, and then it can't do its game plan if you do have the cards. So how do you feel about decks that end up becoming more polarizing matchups versus like more just tempo based, like playing for stats and trying to compete that way?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think there should be a diversity of both. I will openly admit that I think Snap would be a more boring game if it was just, okay, I win if you don't draw your tech, and you win if you do draw your tech. I don't think that would be a super engaging experience if that was what the whole game was. I think it's okay for a little bit of that to exist, or for it to pop up, from time to time. Yeah, tech is just a very, very tricky subject, and is a lot of uh, the topic of our discussions when it comes to these types of really powerful build-around cards.
How often is it the UI or clarity on the cards that limits your design space? Like some of the cards, like Lady Bullseye this season, could get complex pretty quickly based on the text. Does readability play into how far you push some mechanics?
Yes and no. We talked a lot today about just like general complexity, and that's something that we, are always, 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 always super cognizant of. Um, but yeah, Snap is a mobile game. We want to make sure that the game is still fun to play on mobile and not just on PC, and that you're able to read and understand things that are going on a smaller screen. And so, yeah, lots of things interacting with the general board are things that we're cognizant of. Um, so yeah, I think that's the roundabout answer. I think that it is a fair call out that maybe there's the potential for creep on just like things that are affecting locations or specific things in your hand, and that is certainly something we're going to keep being aware of.
Do you ever think about making more keywords to be able to condense down those uh, readability caps so that you can have some extra space on the cards?
Yeah, I think a lot of it just comes down to, do we think it is unlocking design space in a way that's really satisfying? Like, if we're able to consolidate specific concepts, does that actually, effectively give us a tag that we can then interact with in the future? Um, Stuff like that, I think we are much more willing to do. Um, the failure, I think, of this is when you effectively give yourself the means to just attach like five abilities to a card by just consolidating them into one word and just hoping that people understand how the card works. I think there's a couple fail cases there. One, it's asking you to understand all these keywords, so that's more difficult if you're a newer player, of course. But also, I think it's just kind of a failure on the designer part. It's like, do you really need your card to do five things? I doubt it. You probably could have gotten it to do two things, and it would have just been just as exciting if you'd been more measured about its rate or what it did specifically.
So closing this up, since you've been in charge of the OTAs, just wanted to quickly hop back to that. I know personally, I want the OTAs to be used to inject freshness into the game, but it seems right now it's mainly used as a tool to bring down the outliers. Would you say that's the case?
I would say it's its primary and foremost important function. Like, it gives us the flexibility to quickly change the game um, if there's something truly problematic. And so, yeah, at a base level, it's like that is its strongest function, because if we didn't have that lever, we would have maybe a 3 month gap or whatever in between uh, balance patches, or however you would comp it to whatever live service game you play, or whatever paper game you play, and people getting frustrated because the metagame doesn't change fast enough, is primarily the function of the OTA. But of course, like, it also gives us the ability to raise up cards that have been weak for a long time. That's something that's really exciting about the OTA function. And in a perfect world, it basically gives people faith that their cards will always be usable in some fashion. I'm not going to say that it isn't clear that some cards are stronger than others, but we can at least decrease the gap to where people can be excited about their collection, and being able to play with the cards that they really like for a long period of time.
Thank you, Michael, for your time, and hopefully we'll see you all this new season checking out Daredevil Crimson Twilight. See ya.